is not working with my braids, okay? It's just not working. I just need them to go on. But we here. We here, y'all. We here. We here. Welcome in. Welcome in. Welcome in. I hope all is well. I'm a couple minutes late, but we here. We made it. We made it. It's been hectic, y'all. Also, our electricity been on and off today. So if we get a surprise in the dark, I'm forewarning you guys. All right. But I'm excited to be here nonetheless. Um, Let me get my stuff up here. Bear with me. Actually, let me put this air on. It's hot, y'all. I'm sweating. All right, all right, all right. We back. We back. I hope all is well, y'all. Happy Monday, happy Monday, happy Monday. Um, I'm glad that we're able to jump on and talk about part two of the stories we tell ourselves. And I think I have everything up here. Yeah, so just to we'll kind of recap from what we talked about last week, but we're in the middle of a 3-week series on the stories that we tell ourselves, talking about the narratives, the core beliefs, all the things that kind of dictate how we make decisions, our behaviors, and some of those decisions and behaviors are harmful. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And when I get this up here, we can kind of do a quick recap. But if this is your first time, my name is Debbie. I am a certified mindfulness coach, as well as a pre-licensed therapist going through the credentialing and the certifications and licensure in school and all of the things right now, an internship. So this channel is all things self-care, all things mental health. This is not therapy. This is more of information. Hi, Kim. Is it Kim? Is it Kim Captain? Welcome in. So this isn't therapy. This is just information. This is just to give you some insight to what you may be experiencing and giving you some tips and things that you can take away to start initiate change when it comes to these different topics. So the topics are voted on not necessarily every week. Sometimes we talk about multiple things within a time span from the same poll. But we do polls to see what you guys want to hear about, what you want to talk about. And then from there, make a decision on the next topic. So with that said, the stories we tell ourselves is a 3-part series. We talked about last week, kind of just identifying the stories that we start to tell ourselves, the interpretations we make about experiences, about how we view ourselves, how we view other people, how we just view life in general. And then from there, this week we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to dive a little bit more into that and discuss how we start to take those narratives and how we start to take those stories and evolve them into identity, or how we view ourselves, and or just personality, right? Sometimes we may take those things on as a personality trait, and then it becomes a lot more difficult for us to break those bad habits or those harmful habits, okay? I'm in the Midwest. Okay, so just with that, let's dive in. If this is your first time, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like the live. If you haven't subscribed yet, why not? Okay, please do. Let me know where you're watching from. I would love to hear that. You're in Turkey. Okay, awesome. Welcome in. Hi, Nicole. Welcome in. So yeah, tell me where you're watching from. If any of this resonated from last week. If you didn't watch last week, no worries. We'll do a quick recap, and then you can always go back and watch it as well. And then we're going to dive into this identity crisis that we may be experiencing when it comes to the narratives and stories that we tell ourselves. So last week we talked about, I'm just scrolling up here, we talked about why knowing your story or the story that you tell yourself is important. So we talked about how they may affect your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And then a story makes meaning of the experiences that we have. We talked about what it practically looks like, so what it sounds like, and how to identify them. We talked about how the story begins to develop. So we talked through that as well. Hi, Mark. Welcome in. And that's basically, you have an event, you have a situation that happens, you make meaning of that situation, and then from you making meaning, you start to create a narrative or a story, right? And then from there, we talked about where the stories may come from, where they may stem from. And then from there, we talked about how they become invisible, right? Because eventually, once you start to develop these experiences, it becomes so automatic in your day-to-day life to where it starts to become invisible and you don't see it anymore, and it just becomes a part of you. And then we talked about how to start to move away from those stories, and we talked about what that could look like, right? So make sure to go back, rewatch that live. There's a lot of important information or great information in there. But from there, we're going to talk about identity and how this starts to spiral into how we view ourselves and how we see ourselves. I can't recall if I did or not last week, but there's a high level of shame that is attached to the stories that we tell ourselves. And that shame is ultimately related to identity. So when you think about shame, or even when you think about guilt, they're two different things, but I call them the two evil twins, right? So guilt is basically I did something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong, right? So you take that narrative of, oh, I did this wrong thing, or I did this bad thing, or I made this mistake, and in that, now it's a whole it defines who we are as a person, and that begins to turn into our core beliefs and the things that we believe about ourselves or we believe about our experiences. So really, when we're talking about identity, there's going to be a lot of shame oftentimes linked to that because of the fact that that keeps the cycle going, right? All right, so when it comes to the first space I wanted to talk about, which is why do these stories become so powerful so quickly, right? And I talked about last week, I think I might have talked about it briefly, like the neuroscience behind it, right? Where it comes to a point where you have these experiences, your experiences show up in patterns, and then those patterns therefore create these automatic responses and automatic thoughts. So with something being automatic, it becomes so powerful in your life, right? Whether it be just something that's automatically happening on your phone or something automatically happening in your life, anything that's on autopilot or anything that's happening automatically or doesn't have to be prompted to happen is going to create a powerful impact in your life or a powerful presence in your life, right? So once something becomes a part of your identity, we tend to notice or become hyper vigilant to information that fits the story, right? So we look for the evidence, right? If we have an experience and then we have maybe one or two of the same experiences, our brain is going to automatically start look for evidence to solidify that experience even more, right? So with that, let's see here, the story becomes a filtering criteria, right? We start to filter everything through this one core belief, right? And if that core belief has falsehoods, or if it's half truths, or if it's even just a plain old lie, it can create harmful thoughts and behaviors and emotions as well, okay? And with that filtering, every situation, every person, every environment is going to, you're going to subconsciously try to fit it into that criteria. Okay. So for example, you may have a core belief of I'm bad at relationships. Then you have your next awkward or weird interaction, and then you say, well, see, that's why relationships don't work for me. And it continues to feed that story or that narrative, right? Let's see here. The brain is constantly looking for patterns and using previous experiences to help interpret new ones. Once a pattern becomes familiar, it becomes easier to notice, and then that information then confirms it, and we subconsciously recognize what feels familiar. And just because something feels familiar, that automatically, reinforces the narrative or the story that we've been telling ourselves. Okay. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any questions, if this is resonating. If you have any experiences that have come up for you that are like this. Hi, Madison. Welcome in. But yeah, that's really the gist of why it becomes powerful, right? Now those experiences pile on more experiences and then shift from an experience to identity or personality traits, right? So something happened, I give it meaning, I repeat that meaning with more experiences, I then begin to believe that meaning, and then that meaning now has started finding a way or giving you reasons to identify with it. Okay, so for example, I failed at something. Now it kind of results into I'm not good at this, or I'm not capable. Or you may have an experience where someone hurt you or someone hurt me, right? Then it turns into people can't be trusted, right? Or I'm someone who doesn't trust people, or I don't like people, or I don't want to be around people, right? Another example would be I made a bad decision. So then that turns into I always make bad decisions, okay? I'm bad at making decisions, right? It just kind of starts to spiral into this narrative or this story of I'm always, right? Another one I have is I struggled socially, or I struggle socially. Then that turns into I'm awkward, or I'm not a social person, or people don't like me, or people don't understand me, or people don't want to like me, or people don't want to understand me, right? It starts to turn into this whole big storyline that we then continue to repeat and try to make sense of, or it just becomes a rigid rule that we live by, either consciously or subconsciously. Okay. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay. So, with that being said, when and how does this become harmful, right? When does this become something that I may need to think about, or may want to reflect on, or even may want to change, right? So, the first thing you want to notice is, are there falsehoods, right? Is there lies that are in here? Is it a half truth, right? There may be some parts of it that's true to you, right? And because of that, you feel like the whole statement is true. But oftentimes, you may have an experience that may have been a negative experience, but that could have been that experience. That doesn't automatically equate to all of the other experiences that you may have in life that are familiar to that, right? So it's first understanding, are there any falsehoods? And with those falsehoods, are they starting to limit or change your behaviors, right? So I'll say that again. When does it become or begin to be harmful? When there are falsehoods, whether it be untruths or half-truths, and then those falsehoods start to become limiting, or they start to change your behaviors, right? So thinking about what might you stop doing if you believe the story, right? So for example, I'm not good at this is a story that you may tell yourself. And then from there, your behavior may change to you just stop trying, right? Another example, people can't be trusted. A behavior that may follow that is you might stop getting close to people altogether in general. Another falsehood or another narrative you may tell yourself is that I'm not confident, right? There may be some truth in that, right? There may be some truth that, oh, I'm not confident in this specific thing, but it's not a blanket statement. It's a statement within that situation or in that particular experience. It's not something that should technically go across all areas of life, right? So I'm not confident could be another narrative, and then you might stop striving and you might stop setting goals because you feel like you're not confident. So that's what I'm talking about, is when it becomes harmful, is where you have the thought or you have the belief or you have the narrative or you have the story. And in that, it limits you now. It keeps you plateaued, or it keeps you in a space where you don't necessarily want to be. And it stops you from striving. It stops you from hoping. It stops you from setting goals and being a better version of yourself. It stops you or limits you from taking your next step or going into that next phase of life, right? So that's an example. That's the third one, right? Yeah. So I'm not confident. Another one, I'm not that creative. You might stop creating altogether. Another one, I'm not good with money. You might avoid looking at your finances or avoid your finances altogether, which can then cause more harmful things because now you're not attentive to what's going on financially, right? And then from there, the story begins influencing the behavior, and the behavior can eventually create evidence that seems to further prove the story. So that behavior now that you have moved into, those limiting behaviors or those behaviors that you have stopped altogether, now continue to feed the cycle and prove your story to be right. So it continues on the cycle. So you have the story, then you have the story or the experience, then the story, then the behavior. Then you have another experience that's proof of the behavior in this story, right? And then it then creates a stronger story, right? So I'll say that again. You have an experience, you experience something. From that experience, you make meaning and create a story or a narrative. Because you start to believe that story or narrative, that creates limiting behaviors, right? Or stopping behaviors that then can create another experience. And then from there, that's more proof that your story is true. And it continues on a cycle, right? And so with that, that's how it becomes automatic. That's how it becomes even subconscious or unconscious, because of the fact that it's now feeding itself. You're not even having to do the work. It's just feeding itself now. And it just starts to grow and balloon and snowball into this big narrative that now is a huge core belief on how you operate and how you filter and how you navigate through life, right? There's instances where this works and it's a positive experience where you have a narrative about yourself and it's a great thing to live off of. But then there's another side to that where it becomes very harmful, and it creates a sense of self that can be shameful, and it can create a sense of self that is, again, limiting. Okay. Hi, Aria. Welcome in. Okay. So that was, what does it begin to be? When does it become to be? When does it begin to be harmful? I can't speak today. Okay, so next, how to notice when the story is starting to take over, right? So how can we start to pick up or notice or become more aware of when the stories or the narratives are starting to take over? We talked a little bit about this last week and how we can begin to notice, but there's a few things that I wanted to make sure that I pinpoint. So the first one is understanding when you have the terms of I am versus I experience, right? So I am versus I experience. When you start to see yourself saying I am, or this always, or I'm like this, those are some indicators of they're potentially being falsehoods, because now you are creating a summation about yourself that may not always inherently be true, right? So when it comes to this, let's see here. I am anxious, right? That may be something that you may say all the time, versus I'm experiencing anxiety, right? Um, there's a difference that in the narrative that you tell yourself when you say that you're anxious versus you saying you're experiencing anxiety. I am anxious means that anxiety is my identity. This is something that I have attached to me and will always be attached to me. I'm experiencing anxiety is a way to reframe it to say it's not who I am, but it's something that I experience from time to time, right? And so when you start to separate yourself from I am anxious or I'm an anxious person to I'm a person that experiences anxiety, that's the beginning to shifting your mindset of the narrative that you tell yourself that I'm always an anxious person. Okay. Another one would be you may say to yourself, I'm a failure, right? So I am, or I'm a failure, right? And instead of saying that, you could say, I failed at something or I mismanaged something. It's an experience. It's not who I am as a person, right? It's all about language. Another one would be, I'm bad at relationships or I'm a difficult person, versus I've had difficult relationships in the past. That has been my experience in the past. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'm a difficult person. Now, there may be some accountability there. I don't want to dismiss that. There may be some accountability there, but it's all about changing and shifting how you're viewing yourself and the narrative that you tell yourself each and every day. The more that you tell yourself the narrative of I'm a failure, then your behaviors are going to continue to mirror that, because something that you're telling yourself is something that you believe about yourself, and it's kind of like that self-fulfilled prophecy, right? So keep that in mind. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Yeah, those I am statements can make these experiences feel permanent, and it's not even necessarily something that you're doing intentionally. But when you say that I am something, that feels permanent, like it's never going to change, like it's always going to be that way, right? So take that and keep that into consideration, is what are the things that I tell myself that are permanent, right? What are the things that I tell myself will never change? What are the things that I tell myself that I'm never going to get away from, or that's always going to be there, right? Now, there are some elements of life where that may be true, and that may be a different thought process that we have to talk through. But I'm pretty sure there's going to be some falsehoods there where you have a permanent viewpoint on it where it's completely a lie or completely false. Okay. The other area that may pop up for you that you want to notice when the story may be taking over is the see, I knew it effect. Like, see, I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. I knew this was going to go this way, or I knew that this was going to go this direction, or I knew that they were going to do that, right? And it's just like, have you ever said, see, I knew this was going to happen? And you just kind of replay that over and over again, right? That's something that also feeds the story. Okay. Now, there are instances where you were like, you know what, I knew I shouldn't have did that. That shouldn't have been the decision that I made. I shouldn't have let them back in my life, or I shouldn't have did this, or I shouldn't have did that. There may be some elements of that again, there's accountability there, right? But then there's other times where we filter things through old experiences and falsehoods, and we allow those things to completely take us off the rails when it happens again, right? And now it's like, oh, I have no business. I don't need to do it anyway. I shouldn't have did it anyway. See, I knew this was going to happen, and it just kind of keeps feeding the cycle, right? So, for example, people always disappoint me, right? That's a narrative that you may have. Now, granted, people are not perfect, right? There's going to be plenty of relationships where there's going to be some elements of disappointment. That's the common human experience, right? But just because you've had that experience doesn't mean that that's always going to be your experience. There may be instances where people come and pull through for you, right? There may be times where people come through and meet your aid, right? Those are also possibilities. So it's not even just about, again, talking about half truths, right? There may be truth that in the past somebody did disappoint you. And that's the truth, right? But it's not the truth for every situation. It's not the truth for every person. It's not the truth for every environment, right? So the see, I knew it, thing is one of those easy ways to pinpoint something that is continuing to feed. That's continuing to feed, okay? Hi, Wyella. Hope I'm saying that right. Welcome in. Okay, so another thing, let's see here, I'll make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so another thing that you may notice that, or how you may be able to notice when the story is being taken over is when your stories begin to influence your expectations. I'll say that again. When your stories begin to influence your expectations of others, okay? Whether it be expectations of other people or expectations of, a circumstance or a situation, when those stories begin to heavily influence your expectations, that's a key indicator that your story or your narrative is having a huge impact, right? So once you have a story about yourself, about other people, or about life in general, we can start expecting future experiences to follow the same pattern. Okay? For example, people eventually leave. That may be a narrative that you have in your mind, right? And then there also may be truths behind that, right? You had circumstances repeatedly or not where people have left. And so now, that's something that you automatically think with every person that you have interactions with, right? Now, again, there's an element of truth with this one because at the end of the day, people are in your life for a period, for a season, or for a lifetime, right? And so there are instances with this particular scenario or this particular situation, there's a level of acceptance that has to happen because of the fact that people can leave. And that's a possibility. And because we can't control people, there's always a possibility of that happening, right? But the fact that we have that as an expectation can create harmful emotions, harmful thoughts, harmful behaviors, or harmful experiences, right? So people eventually leave. So your expectation is that everyone that comes into my life is probably going to leave, and they're probably going to leave quickly, right? It's the way that you expect things to happen, and having those fears and anxieties, especially even if we're talking about like relationships, people who are anxiously attached. I don't think I've talked about attachments here yet, but people that are anxiously attached or avoidant attached, right? A lot of times it's because of the narratives that they tell themselves about relationships, right? My mom left, my dad left, I had this caregiver, they left, everybody left me. So when someone comes into my life, I have to anxiously hold on to them to ensure that they don't leave. But that ends up being even more of a detriment to the relationship, that then therefore causes them to leave, not because they were going to, but because of the anxious attachment, right? So it dictates our behaviors associated with the story. And again, that continues to feed the cycle, because now that I'm anxiously attached to someone, that turns them off, they end up leaving. That then continues to feed the narrative that people will always leave me, right? Again, it's a cycle, guys. It is a cycle, and it's a vicious cycle that sneaks up on you to the point where you don't even notice that it's happening until it's happened. Things like that, like I just explained, happens like 5 or 6 times. You're like, oh, I can't keep a relationship, or oh, my friends always, say this about me, or they always say that I show up this way, or whatever. And a lot of times it's linked back to our core beliefs, and it's linked back to those stories and narratives, and then us attaching those narratives to our identity and our personality traits. That's really what it comes from. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. So other negative expectations that you put on the future. So I kind of talked about it a little bit, but a couple of expectations you may see is I will never find love, or no one will ever understand me, or things always go wrong, right? Those are all just quick examples. I hope this is helpful, y'all. I really do. I really, really do. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, so that's the gist of it, y'all. I think that I went through all of them. Yeah. So where did I go through? We talked about what do these stories become? See, can't talk today. Why do these stories become so powerful is where we started. And then we moved into those experiences, pile on more experiences, and then shift from an experience to identity. Then we went into when does this become harmful? And then we talked about how to notice when the story is taking over. Okay? So with that, just know that you are allowed to have a history without turning your history into identity. Okay? Just because you have an experience, and just because you make meaning of that experience, and just because you've had several types of experiences, right? It doesn't mean that it has to attach to your identity. It doesn't mean that it has to attach to your future, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to filter everything through that narrative or that story, right? You have the power to see the falsehoods. You can have the power to see the assumptions, and where you have patterns, and where there's truths, and where there's untruths. And you have the power to make those changes and adjustments when it's time. Okay. So one thing that you can take away from tonight is a journaling question that you can kind of think about or chew on this week, which is, what story have I come to believe about myself, and how might that story be influencing what I notice, expect, or believe about my life? I'll repeat it again. What story have I come to believe about myself, and how might that story be influencing what I notice, what I expect, or believe about my life? Okay? It's a full question. I know. But it's a good question to really think about. And it's not even about you listing all of the stories that you tell yourself, right? It's not even about you, trying to journal every single thing that you think. But it's more so of you picking up on those stories or narratives that are really limiting you, that are really stopping you from progressing or being the version of yourself that you want to be or that you desire to be, and starting there, right? There may be other narratives that are there that that you notice, but really even just picking one, your top one that you find that is the biggest limiter, and starting with that one. I'll say the question again. What story have I come to believe about myself, and how might that story be influencing what I notice, what I expect, or believe about my life, right? And just getting that out on paper, something that you notice, something that is maybe not even as obvious, right? The obvious ones are the ones that you're very cognizant of, but even the ones that you don't notice on the surface, something you really got to think through and think about, okay? I'm excited for next week, y'all. Next week we'll end the series. We talked about last week again. We talked about noticing the story. This week we talked about when the story becomes your identity, and next week we'll talk about how can we rewrite the story. Okay, so next week will be a lot about reframing, how we can change these narratives and really adjust them slowly but surely. It's something that, again, this is something that has happened automatically over time. So it's not going to be something that you're going to fix tomorrow, right? It's not going to be something that you're going to get it perfect when you do attempt to change or alter or adjust how you respond to these narratives. This is just the beginning. This is just for you to have more awareness of it. That's what mindfulness means, right? Mindfulness just means awareness. And this is just a matter of bringing more awareness to something that you may be experiencing, something that may be causing burnout, something that may be causing stress, something that may be causing depression, because a lot of times these core beliefs are linked to strong emotions. It may be causing, you may be angry all the time and not know why. And it could be linked to one of these core beliefs, right? Or you could be anxious all the time and not know why. And it could be linked to one of these core beliefs, right? So this is just the beginning of awareness. And then it's something that you can work through on your own, or you can work through in therapy. So I hope this is helpful. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything else, any of my other notes. No, I think we hit everything. Y'all be blessed, y'all. Y'all have a good week. Happy Monday. Happy week. We're almost at the end of August. Like I said before, I don't know if anybody may have missed, but after next week, I will be taking a break since I will be studying for my national counseling exam. Wish me luck, because it's going to be an uphill battle getting my study in. I got 2 quarters left, y'all. We are almost there, and I will have my master's in counseling. It's exciting, but it is also stressful. So I'm going to take a break from lives for a couple of weeks while I study up. It ain't even going to be a couple of weeks, y'all. I ain't going to lie to y'all. Y'all probably won't see me till Christmas. I ain't going to lie to you. I ain't going to lie to y'all because it's going to be a lot of study. But y'all all have a great rest of your night, and I will see you next Monday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time so we can finish out this series. Talk to you soon.